color of Jews, page 69 through 70. Since so few people, including Jews, know about Jewish histories and communities around the globe, this information comes as a sanctuary shock, followed, I hope, by a shift in perspective. But as Lewis Gordon, director of the Center of Afro-Jewish Studies at Temple University, points out, what's compelling is there are certain myths that dominate the way we study migratory populations. One such myth is that people migrate and their descendants remain exactly the same, and that's not true. People we see today in Northern Europe who call themselves Jews, their ancestors did not look the way they look. Similarly, what's interesting is we're seeing a living example of this today. In my research, I come across so many Jewish communities, not only Ashkenazic and Sephardic. I come across the Oba Yahuda of Uganda, the Limba Jewish community of Southern Africa, on and on. I just came back from Brazil, where I began to see not only the presence of Moroccan and Ethiopian Jewish communities, but also some of the lay rituals. I've seen people in the streets who reflect the West African Jewish community who may have come over through slavery, but no one is asking those questions, so the research has yet to develop. Mizrahim from the Middle East and North Africa, Sephardim from the Iberian Peninsula, Ashkenazim from Western and Eastern Europe, but these forms represent diaspora centuries old, and descendants live all over the globe. These terms may suggest but cannot predict color or appearance. By one's estimate, 13.5 million Jews in the world break down into an also estimate 3 plus million Mizrahim, who is stranger, Sephardim, and 10 plus million Ashkenazi. But where are we counting the Hebrew Israelites, the conversos who fled to the New World, the Jews in Nigeria, Uganda, India, Iran, Turkey? Jews of color in the United States, invisible, unwelcome, thus undercounted. Undercounted because unwelcome. Page 173. Born on the island of Jamaica to an Afro-Jewish mother and Afro-Asian father, he came to the United States when he was 9 years old to live with his mother and siblings in the Bronx. His work with the Center for Afro-Jewish Studies involves developing research on Afro-Jewish communities worldwide and on Jewish and African diasporic peoples. He is currently working on a book on philosophical and historical questions posed by the existence of Afro-Jews. Lewis Gordon. I had a unique relationship to this issue. Being Jewish, black, and from the island of Jamaica, in my childhood, the only people I knew who were Jews were either dark-skinned, brown, or beige. In other words, all people of color. So there was this whole world of Judaism I knew about that I grew up in that was in no way reflected by the presentation of Judaism in Judaic studies. I didn't go to graduate school in Judaic studies. It's the difference between being a scholar of Judaism and being a Jew. But researching Africana studies, especially on the African diaspora, invariably brings one in contact with African Judaism. As a scholar, I knew about African Judaism. But the problem is, all the scholarly activity that dominated Judaic studies had already centered itself without recognizing its limitations.
My mother was Jewish on both sides. Right? Her father's side was what we call Mizrahi Jews. They were from Jerusalem, and in the 19th century. Okay, and my mother's side were Sephardic Jews from Ireland. Okay. Now the thing about it, a lot of people even today people would presume Irish Jews as Ashkenazi, but they were Sephardic. You see. But now things are being rewritten in such a way that anybody who's in Europe who's Jewish is called Ashkenazi. Now, I bring this up merely because what many people today don't realize is that a very short time ago, there were no white Jews. To be Jewish was not to be white. And in fact, even in the U.S., the history books, the first recorded Jew was a man by the name of Solomon, arrested for working on the Sabbath in New Hampshire. because it was the Christian Sunday. And his argument was, I'm not a Christian. But he was arrested as a black person. You see what I'm getting at? And historically, even when I give lectures across the globe, even when I'm in the UK, I've given lectures in front of large groups of what in this country would be called white Jews. When I mentioned to them that I grew up where even the palest looking Jewish person will never say the words, I'm white. They exhale and said, somebody's finally talking the truth. Okay? So the first thing to bear in mind is where did this whiteness thing come from to normativize it in such a way that people who don't identify as white are being asked, are you Jewish? And that comes from an effort to try to conflate, right? In fact, it comes from an investment in a project of making Jews white. And to bear in mind, this is where it gets really complicated. And again, I'm just going to be short, but when colonialism came about, right, Euromodern colonialism, a lot of the colonies were outnumbered by people of color, whether they're the indigenous people or the African enslaved. And there became a need, a very project of a constructed whiteness. And what began to happen is people who are not white in Europe had a doorway to become white in the colonies. But what became very complicated in many of the colonies is because, you see, Jews as a category were not actually as a religious category. And the thing about it is that a lot of the colonies began to disaggregate things where you could have a religion and a race. And so for European Jews, who some in cases are darker than I am, a context in which if you made your identity fundamentally Jewish, you could now have a religion. And the question is, what was your race? And in a country that says it'll protect your religion, but not your race, you needed to fuse your race with your religion in a way that would make it white. And so if you look at a lot of the past in the United States, and if you look at a lot of just even the wonderful book that Laura, Leibman is working on, you would find in the Caribbean, Latin America, many of the other places, Jewish communities would just say we're Jews. But that meant not being white, you see? So for instance, even in my childhood, when I thought about being Jewish, it wasn't as a religion. It was in the United States I had to learn what things I was already doing that were called religion. You see what I'm getting at? It would be like a Yoruba, or if you're a person, Tamil, coming here, and now you have to rewrite yourself as a religion. And so the short version of it is that the fact of the matter is, to make whiteness seductive, you have to give some perks. And so there are people who, in an effort to become white, became such a part of the project to get what now slides into white supremacy, that it began to split many Jewish communities and rewrite our history. And those, particularly who are most vehement about becoming white, are the people in political terms who are called neoconservative Jews. And this became very tricky because you see a lot of people who are not neoconservative Jews, historically left or liberal, etc. If you look at that Jewish history, it's in its language, rich with what's called miscegenation. And in fact, there's always been this question of a fusion, right, of Jewish active work that was constantly transforming Jewish communities, as linked to what Kelly talked about with Tikkun Olam. The identity of fighting for justice in such a way that was more inclusive. And so it made Judaism something that was generative. Neoconservatism wanted to create a purification model. And in that purification model was premised upon whiteness, and began to push in such a way this problem, in such a way that in some places it so pushed away so many Jewish people that the people who now self-declare, they declare themselves authentically Jewish by virtue of white, began to be linked to white power, and has begun to do something that is very destructive in Jewish communities. And it becomes even more so when the U.S. context, as imperial, imposes that model globally. Anyway, I'll stop there because I know my colleagues have more to say.